Beyond the Pelvis is hosted by Dr. Keneal Siegel, a pelvic floor PT and intuitive healer, and Laura Haraka, a somatic practitioner and breathwork facilitator. Each week, we explore alternative and holistic approaches to healing chronic pelvic pain and other painful or chronic conditions. Join us and other experts in mind, body, and spiritual healing as we discuss a wealth of modalities ranging from ancient practices to modern therapies that challenge the conventional Western model of treatment. Let's get right to it.
Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Pelvis. And today we have Camara Meri Rajabari, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist and the face behind the ancestral psychotherapist. Camara believes deeply in the exploration of ancient ancestral wisdom as a psychological resource. Over the last few years, she's been working with traditional African indigenous practices and honoring the wisdom of plant medicines to help heal generational trauma. Welcome to the podcast, Camara.
Thank you so much. Thank you both for having me here.
You're so welcome. We are very excited to have you for so many different reasons. You offer such a unique form of therapy that I was really excited to have you on to discuss this, because I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, like, how does this relate to, our general podcast? But as we get into the conversation, it will make more sense. But before we dive right in, I'd love to ask you, like, how did you end up here where you are now doing the work you're doing right now? Like, what led you here?
Oh, wow. I feel like as someone who's kind of like in their mid 50s, I feel like, oh, that story starts to get really long after a while. But I do appreciate that question because, I'm constantly have to check in with myself about, what has this journey been? What has this path been? I could say that, my lineage really was one that I had a lot of interest in. Even a lot of people in my family, we've done a lot of the genealogy of our family. And I was born in the Southeast. So I was born in Mobile, Alabama. And I was born during the civil rights era. My parents migrated from Mobile, part of the Great Migration. Some people might know of that. And they migrated to California when I was just a baby. And so our ancestors were enslaved Africans, but also we have indigenous blood inside of us too. We're part of the Muskogee Creek Indian Nation. And so we found records of, people in my family, and, my great grandfather was enslaved until the age of 19. And so all of that to say that knowing a little bit about my own family history, and then on top of it, being able to observe some of the traumas my own family experienced, down to my father having his own struggles with substance, I started to look at our family like, why are things the way they are in our family? And so really, it was my own family that got me curious about healing the family line, because I started to see patterns from alcoholism to certain kinds of trauma. And I began to understand that, did this kind of begin with certain people, or does it have an origin that's even older? And so, I've had a number of entryways into the healing profession. I started out as a caseworker, and I've done casework with houseless community. I've done casework with veterans at the VA. And even I think the last casework job I have was with the VA. And I started to understand, like, some of the people that I was working with who were wounded in war, there was two things I started to notice: that they did better when they had a supportive family structure system. But when they didn't have that system, and maybe they joined the military and they had a real traumatic family background, when they had additional experiences serving, that they were usually people that we worry about a lot, people that you see who are now houseless or, have severe mental illness that they're dealing with. So I started to notice the family was important. And I said, well, let me go back to school and get my license, because I was doing the work that I wanted to do, but it was a case management work and it didn't give me the depth of training around trauma. I saw that it was necessary. So I went back to school, kind of in a midlife, I graduated from grad school when I was 50. And I just realized this is the work that I really have wanted to do. But also in school, it was a little conventional, right? They teach you pretty much the in the box way of doing clinical work. But I had the honor, maybe even the privilege of going to a school that really looked at consciousness. It was a school in the Bay Area. They're no longer around, unfortunately. A lot of schools kind of suffer right now with economics. But that school had Ram Dass in the early days speaking there, so there was a lot of thought coming out of there around what does it mean to help the whole person. And so my degree is more in holistic psychotherapy, even though I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. So, and in that program, one of my professors who was doing psychopharmacology introduced the idea of there's therapists who are doing psychedelic work. And I was like, wait, hold on. I want to explore this. And so, I had professors introducing me to dream work. I specialize in art-based work. And currently, I'm an arts-based ancestral psychedelic-assisted psychotherapist. That's kind of how I frame the work that I do. I specialize in anxiety, depression, intergenerational trauma, as well as intergenerational wisdom in Black, Indigenous, and people of color. I also have a really small side niche that kind of happened that I also assist people who are survivors of religious cults and religious trauma. So that's kind of, hopefully that wasn't a long answer, but that's kind of been the journey so far, and it's still growing. I'm constantly looking at family systems as informing how do we shift psychology and wellness for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, because often our narrative wasn't included in the early study of psychotherapy.
You bring up a good point. I mean, so many good points, and also you bring so much to the table. I'm like in awe of all the things that you do. And, even though your education, the program that you did no longer exists, I feel like it already did the work it needed to do, because you are a product of that program, and whoever else went through that program is a product of it. And then you're just out here doing the thing that you do. That is just so amazing that you had that experience. And I don't think I've ever heard that term, holistic psychotherapy, but it makes sense. And you brought up like you were taught to see the whole person, right? Versus like, oh, they have anxiety. Let's teach you how to manage anxiety, which I feel like is not helpful for most people. And everyone can benefit from a more holistic, conscious-based, looking into art and dream work and plant medicine. My goodness, that's just so much. So I don't even have any more questions right now. I'm just like in awe of all the things. So
yeah, and I mean, holistic psychotherapy, I think what it was trying to do was not so much center the DSM. If people don't know what the DSM is, it's a diagnostic manual that conventional, I mean, I don't know. I've used the word conventional or normal psychotherapy. I don't even know what the adjective is, but conventional psychotherapy, traditional psychotherapy has used this manual, which actually even Bessel van der Kolk said in one of his lectures one time that he was part of the early team that was putting together these studies. And they said, really, it's just a whole bunch of therapists and doctors came together and said, these symptoms seem to occur across the board. But he said they were never meant to be the actual, I don't know. I'm
diagnostic
words
tool,
and it,
yeah.
the actual diagnosis. I feel like I was glad that he said that part, because what I work with, I'm not really a therapist that works from that framework of you've got this diagnosis and it's pathologized. I am looking at the whole person and saying, what in your experiences have created these symptoms? And these symptoms exist and live potentially in all of us. Given the right conditions, we all could have some kind of diagnosis, whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression. If someone passed away in your family, you were really close to them, there's going to be moments where you may experience some of these symptoms. Now, are there people with severe presentations of these symptoms? Yes. And do they need to be treated probably in a more concentrated way? Yes. But many of us will be, and unfortunately have been exposed to different traumas. And we're having to really look at our whole life and learn how to, with my clients, I teach a lot about managing your nervous system, living your life from a nervous system perspective, where you can prioritize this nervous system, where you can learn how to track your moods, how to understand what situations, what conditions activate that nervous system, and how can you live from a perspective of wellness.
So I'm in awe a little bit of what you do as well. I'm not sure if I want you to be my best friend or I'm going to hire you when we're done with the podcast. So
I need both. I need both.
So I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit about how these symptoms from our ancestral history show up in our lives.
Ancestral work, I'll say a little bit about my history with that, was, I feel like I'm dating myself, but maybe about 20 years ago, I had a friend from South Africa who was also working with Malidoma Somé. I don't know if people know Malidoma Somé. And at that time, she was a student of Malidoma Somé, who is a traditional African wisdom shaman. I'm sure he has many titles. He's now passed on. I think he transitioned in 2015. But back then, she was studying with him. And she started to introduce to me in a group that she was leading, just some of that wisdom thought from South Africa, and took me on my first vision quest. Like there was just like a lot of deep work I started to do. And part of that vision quest, one of that experiences was really connecting with my ancestral line and starting to, it's so much so that I was hearing their voice, like hearing their wisdom. And those practices I deepened over time and maybe even changed to my own unique practices. And I think where I'm going here is that this work, it's ancestral, and it's also, these ancestors live inside of us. I know it's going around on social media, but it's been a fact that, women, the feminine body, they're born with the eggs already. We're born with those, it's 10,000 eggs. And those eggs existed in our mother, and they existed in her mother. And it gives you the perspective of many ways in which our lineage lives inside of us. And a lot of this work, let me know if I'm still answering your question, is that a lot of this work is to understand that maybe some of the symptoms even that we experience in life are not totally ours. They could be symptoms that were experienced by our ancestors, by our early mothers, fathers even. I study currently right now a modality called family constellations, where we're looking at how belonging in the family system and how this family system has shaped itself can actually impact how we somatically experience our lives.
Like, it makes sense to me because I'm in the space, I'm in the trauma space, and I read and listen, and I go in all the rabbit holes and find new ones and make new ones. Like, I just go in all of them. And, you brought up the piece about on the feminine side, the feminine lineage. Part of me existed in my mother's womb when she was in the womb of my grandmother.
Yes.
Right? So it's like part of you was already there, existed generations before you were even thought of. Your mother wasn't even born yet.
Right.
But there was a part of you. And there's so many books I can reference. The Body Keeps the Score, right? Like, you weren't a full-fledged human person yet, but that was a part of you. There were cells that existed there that made who you are today. And those cells hold memories. Body keeps a score. And there could have been trauma that your grandmother experienced that you are acting on or experiencing in this current life, and you don't have any memory of it, but your cells have memory of it. Your mother may not even have any memory of it because she was in the womb, but she's also experiencing that same trauma. And then it gets reinforced and passed on to you. And then I pass it on, and it just keeps going. And that's the idea behind generational trauma. It's there, right? Or on a cellular level, we're present, or a part of us is at least present, and we may not have access to those memories, but our body remembers, our cells remember that. And it could be something as simple as, I don't like crowds, right? I don't like crowds. It could have been something my grandmother experienced that happened to her. And then my mother doesn't like crowds. And then I get anxious when I'm in a crowd and I have no idea why. And it could have been something crazy, right? That happened when she was in the crowd that startled her and traumatized a lot of people. And it's like a marker that changes us on a cellular level to protect us. It's all for protection. Even though I'm trying to go to school and I need to be in crowds, this is not helpful and useful now, but it's just our bodies, our cells are trying to protect us from something bad might happen when you're in a crowd, because it's remembering memories and history from generations ago. So I hope that makes sense to some people. And the same goes for, you brought it up, intergenerational wisdom. Right? I could be amazing and excellent at doing this thing, and that's because that came from my grandmother or great-great-grandmother. So it's not always the trauma. It could be the wisdom, as you mentioned. It's not always bad things that get passed on. It could be the good things, useful things as well. So just something to keep in mind for some people.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. And it's good to balance that out, because many of us, we will cling to some of the, the social media talk, which is like, oh, everybody has trauma and we've got to deal with it. And it's true. There's a certain amount of trauma that we experience just living in a society that's a little traumatic. So, I mean, there is that larger perspective, but also what you're saying, the wisdom, the wellness, the knowledge base, it also gets passed down. The character, the things that we're not sure why we like things. We like a particular kind of music, or our food particularly spicy. Like some of those things are cultural, but some of them things are passed down too. So yeah.
It's so interesting. It doesn't have to be a trauma, right?
Yeah.
And it even goes into the realm of organ transplants.
Right.
So if someone is donating an organ that like salty foods, and you receive this organ and all of a sudden you like salty foods, because memories, things are stored in the cells. It's just a scientific fact. that's how it works.
Our bodies are fascinating. And I'm really glad that there is this movement, even within psychology, even hopefully the medical field as well, is to start looking at our relationship with the body. That wellness is not just about taking a pill or some kind of medicine, but to understand, how does your experiences, even your current experiences, impact your wellness? It's a whole body approach to life. It's a whole, not even looking at just our singular bodies, but even when we're in relationship with others, how do our connection create more wellness? The pandemic at its height, a lot of people realized that isolation was just a very big issue. And before the height of COVID, we were going to work, we were in workplaces, we had human interaction, many of us. But then, you were ordered to go indoors. It's like, and you were staying indoors for an indefinite period of time. I still laugh when some of my colleagues were like, remember, we were told clients, I'll just be a couple of weeks and we'll see you all later. It's like 3 years later. But anyway, all that to say is our connections are part of our wellness. Our community is part of our wellness. And yeah, this cellular information that we have inside of us, it extends out into the whole entire earth. This is how we can get wellness from plants. We can get wellness from just being in nature and being around each other. Yeah.
It's so important to look for support. And I think as women, we haven't always wanted to ask for support, and sometimes it's hard to ask for support. But I think it's so important to ask for it and be part of community. So I'm just curious a little bit too, is we know that it happens in our cells, but what can we do about it to help us heal?
Well, I have various ways that I work, because there is a clinical approach. Say if someone comes to you and they say, I'm experiencing a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, there is a clinical approach. So, we are going to do things like, have you tracked your moods? Have you understand? So there's what we call in the psychology field, psychoeducation. Just generally, how are you looking at this relationship with your body? So we do some assessment there, like what's your general relationship with your body? Some of that is just general assessment of how well do you sleep? Are you eating? Who are your primary relationships? What is your work life like? So, we do that. But then there's also the piece of the lineage work. For me, I could take it a number of different ways depending on the client, because some clients are attracted to the work I do because they're already in their spiritual practice venerating their ancestors, or maybe culturally that is just part of their cultural practice even. So they are happy to be with a therapist that doesn't pathologize that, because traditional psychotherapy would say, oh, you're hearing ancestral voices, or is that voices, and then you could tell that certain therapists would start to take that in a direction of illness, when for some people, and a large majority of Black, Indigenous, brown bodies, these cultures, hearing your family members that have passed on, hearing the voices of your ancestors is a healthy thing. It's actually for them something that provides them with wisdom, just as somebody would say, oh, I pray and I hear my ancestors' voices. Now, in some traditions, your ancestors are not prayed to, they're prayed with. It's a collaborative relationship. So it's not something where, and a lot of people misunderstand how people are working with their ancestors. And it's different across cultures, but there is a river that kind of runs underneath it all, which is we're honoring those who came before us and their experiences. And in certain African traditions, you stand on the shoulders of your ancestors, meaning they're there to support you with your everyday life. They're your mundane life. the more that you get into this relationship of talking with them, speaking with them, not just about your problems, but about the good things that are happening in your life. Because in traditional African religion, your ancestors want the bloodline to do well. That's their whole purpose. So they love to hear the stories about how your child just graduated from kindergarten. And they love to have an offering every once in a while of libations or food that you think would have been their favorite food. So some of this work can get very ritualized, like, you're honoring people who have come before you. Maybe you have pictures of them on your altar. Maybe you bring them flowers. Maybe you light a candle a certain, someone's birthday or memorial date. So there's that piece to the work as well. But it's also about understanding, most importantly, from my perspective, the family's story, the family's narrative. What has happened? Who are these people that came before you? For some of us, that's a traumatic story, some parts. For others of us, it's a story that we love to tell. And it's finding, and some of us don't know that story. We were adopted, or we were in foster care, or maybe there's just a family behavior of secrecy. So how do we work with that? And to understand inside of us, those stories are also alive. Even if we don't know the exact details and we didn't hear it from a great-great-grandmother because they were passed on before we were even born, there's still that wisdom inside of us. So a lot of this work too is about connecting to your divine inner wisdom. Some people might call it intuition. Some other people might connect with it as your gut. It's a sense, a felt sense. It's phenomenology. Is that the word for it? It's like the phenomena of understanding that we're looking at our whole world when we're looking at ourselves. Like if we're in a conversation right now and all of a sudden I'm saying something that feels very important and we're hearing a car honking outside, beep, 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 beep. Like in some instances, we're including that as an emphasis from the universe. It's like, oh, wow, pay attention to what's being said right here. And so it's teaching clients a little bit about how do you relate to this world? It's constantly giving you information. Some of that information's inside of you, some of it's happening all around you. I come from indigenous cultures and relate to indigenous cultures that believe the earth is a living organism. So none of us are separate from anything. And maybe our illness has come about because we believe we're separate. We believe that we're separate from each other. We believe we're separate from our neighbors, other countries. And that separateness allows for people to make certain decisions that ultimately could end up being harmful to a whole group of people, wars, things like that. A lot of this indigenous wisdom, whether it's African or North American or, Central South American, whether it's coming from Europe even or Asia, it runs under pretty much the theory is that we're all connected. So a lot of psychotherapy, in my opinion, to be good psychotherapy needs to help you understand that and dive into your connectedness.
Thank you for explaining that. And I think you provided really basic recommendations and showing people that it could be as basic as just connecting to your own body and then step outside that a little bit and see how you're connected to other people and things, to as complicated as have some pictures on an altar if you have an altar, and light a candle and leave food out and pour libations. It could be as complicated or as simple and basic as you'd like. And everyone should understand we all have ancestors. I know we're talking about indigenous and African, but everybody got ancestors. And this was the practice of many different cultures before big religions. Not saying that people who are religious can also practice this or don't practice this, because some of them definitely do, but the majority of people did have some sort of ritual for ancestors, for the land, for animals, for the planets, for something. It existed well before many of the things that we're used to today. And it's really just about coming back to that, as you said, just coming back and seeing that we're all connected, we're all related, and this separate individualism could be one of the causes of our suffering, whether it shows up as chronic pain, anxiety, depression, or any other chronic thing, physical, mental, or emotional. And finding some sort of connection might be a place to start. Because once you start, I don't think it ever ends.
Yeah, and to understand that a lot of this work, it's kind of like breadcrumbs, you're just following the trail of wellness. Like, I had this dream. There was something about that dream that left me with an image. Let me research that a little bit more. That's kind of like the way that I do it, and then I end up having a conversation with Laura, and I'm like, oh, Laura said something about this, and now that's striking me. And, like, I just keep it going. And sometimes that is the journey of wellness. Yeah, I really ultimately do feel like it's to bring back together humanity. It's just to bring us back together.
Would you mind talking a little bit about how plant medicine can help with this connection?
Right. So plant medicines, they've been a part of certain indigenous communities forever. And, they've been used in a number of different ways. Definitely, if someone had an illness, they would go to the medicine person. I'm going to use that as a general term, but, some people will call them shamans or medicine men, medicine women, medicine people. What I'll say is, traditionally, these communities use the medicines that we now call psychedelics in a way of connecting with the soul, the spirit, because what some of that theory is that you're experiencing illness on a spiritual level, maybe. Even if there's a physical symptom, there may be something spiritual happening. So traditionally, these medicines were allowing for the medicine person to come in and talk to your ancestors, talk to different guiding spirits. So it can go that way. So it's a little bit of the history of it. Now we fast forward it to more Westerners, people from the United States even, getting introduced to these medicines, through the different indigenous communities. We have Maria Sabina, who really introduced her own community's use of mushrooms to a man who, swore to her he would keep that knowledge sacred, but then he came and did a whole article. Yeah, whole dossier article that really made her whole community like a gold rush in terms of like people going down there and wanting to experience these magic mushrooms, which, unfortunately really caused a lot of trouble for her and her family. But to go to the place of like, now we're kind of fast forward a little bit more, even though I think there's still some things that are a little concerning about the psychedelic movement. It really is that psychedelics in and of themselves, these medicines in a psychological way, can help you lower your defenses. Those defenses, when you're, I don't know, anyone who's worked with trauma, we know that sometimes retelling that story can be just as traumatizing as the original experience for many people. And so there's things traditionally that psychotherapists have used, like exposure therapy, which they do a lot at the VA of that. Those things, even though the theory around it is to expose yourself to that trauma and try to, reprogram it, it can be very intense for a lot of people, so much so that they don't want to even do therapy anymore. What psychedelics being introduced to therapy means that the clinician can work with the client on a medicine that's appropriate for their symptom. Not all psychedelic medicines will be used with all symptoms. So right now, legally, you can use ketamine, which is a lab-produced psychedelic. It's been around forever. If you've been to the dentist, and probably they use it in children's medicine as well for putting children under before surgery. Veterinarians use it with animals. So it's like ketamine at a certain level, a certain dosage can become psychedelic. And so it's been good for some people who experience depression. Some people have tried a few doses of this medicine and their depression seems to really have dissolved. It's not everyone. I mean, with ketamine, I think there are still some ways in which we're seeing that it's not consistent with everyone. And sometimes it's not even consistent even as the same person taking the medicine. So you may have one experience on ketamine, you try it a few different times, and there's different experiences that you're going to have. But it is the one legal, what we call above ground way that therapists could sit with you while you're on this particular medicine. And you will have a psychedelic dose if you need to. There's a therapeutic dose, there's a psychedelic dose. It gets, where the therapist does need some education around this. Typically, I think in most states, therapists, marriage family therapists or social workers, we're not allowed to prescribe. So we are working with psychiatrists. Sometimes in certain states, psychologists have the ability to prescribe. So we're working alongside a prescriber, whether it's a nurse practitioner, a doctor, and we are working with the client with the ketamine. There are other medicines that are good for different things. Unfortunately, they're still scheduled at Schedule 1. Schedule 1 in the United States is an illegal substance that you can't have any possession of. And so the legalities are kind of holding up something that's very promising in terms of the medicines. They're not a magic pill, but they do help people in certain areas to access themselves a little bit more. And again, relax those defenses and allow yourself to access the story of your trauma without being re-traumatized. That's the hope of psychedelics. And, MDMA might be close to getting approved by the government. There's a lot of key research being done right now with first responders and veterans and certain populations. And I think the state of Kentucky is doing some really interesting work.
Colorado and Oregon, of course.
Yeah, Colorado, Oregon. So there's some states really leading that movement. And I think we're going to see more development, but it's a political issue. Yes. We had for many years a war on drugs, and you would be surprised how much of that has really stuck in the general population. And I also want to do the flip side, which is many of us have had families. When I look at the communities I'm working with, many of us have had family members that have succumbed to substance. And many of us have had family members who have been arrested in terms of substance use. So there's a lot of trauma there in Black and Brown communities around the use of substance. So there's some people who've adopted even that's bad. Don't bring up any kind of drug use for anything, So we have to acknowledge that some people have been traumatized by policing systems around substance. And now we're coming and saying, oh, but it's okay to heal with these substances, while someone may have an uncle or a father who's serving time, even now, for cannabis use. And cannabis now, I think the president has made it Schedule 3 or something like that. So now cannabis is mostly legal to use, but there are people who are incarcerated for cannabis use. So, there's some of these political aspects of this work that we have to recognize, and also the appropriation of indigenous uses of these medicines, and how some of the medicines like peyote, some of the mushrooms even, they have a very sacred way, ceremonies that are used. And just because somebody pays a few $1,000s to do a training doesn't make you a shaman. You know what I mean? It's like, and so there's that aspect of it. But going back to the wellness part, I think that there could be, especially for people who have been maybe for years in therapy and not made much progress because maybe they have complex PTSD, maybe they have the kind of trauma that talk therapy and maybe a few other modalities have not been able to like really help them make progress with their treatment. It could be that psychedelics could work. I'm a big believer in the slow movement of it, though, meaning we're very conscious with how we're using medicine with people. We're making sure that whether or not people are licensed clinicians or they're sitters, you know, people who sit with people who have been trained, just making sure everybody understands the nature of trauma and understands their own trauma when they're working with people on medicines too, right? Because there can be some missteps there as well. So, but I mean, that's the same with any kind of psychotherapy. I think therapists have to always be doing our own work as well.
So I'm just curious, you refer people out sometimes for ketamine treatments, if I'm hearing you correctly. I'm just wondering if you're administering the therapy at the same time as the ketamine treatments, or is it just that they go for ketamine and come back to you for therapy? I'm just curious how that works.
Yeah, it can work in a couple of ways, right? So what we're referring out is the prescription. So anyone who's, for me, anyone who wants to do ketamine and wants me to sit with them while they're on the medicine, they would need to go to a prescriber, whether that's a doctor, a nurse practitioner that's authorized to prescribe ketamine. So they do have to get their prescription. When they come back to the office, we're doing kind of the preparation session. So we're talking about what are the possibilities of what could happen while you're on ketamine? What are some of the things that, you know, what intentions do you want to set? What are some things that you would prefer to happen while you're on the medicine, such as gentle touch, if you're getting really dysregulated, or do you not want any touch at all? And to also really set up an environment of safety within the setting. They call it set and setting for a reason, which is you're trying to first prep the client to be comfortable and safe in the environment that you're going to create while they're on the medicine. Because quite literally, when you're on any kind of medicine, any psychedelic medicine, you are vulnerable. So you're needing to make sure that people you're working with are very clear about how they're going to support you while you're on the medicine, and you're clear about it. And to also know while you're on the medicine, some of the things that you talked about previously might change. You know, someone might say, you know what, I didn't think I wanted you to hold my hand, but now I do. Or I thought I wanted you to hold my hand, but really I prefer no touch. And that's still okay to let the client know that these dynamics might change while you're still on the medicine. The great thing about ketamine is the window of what I want to say, the window of activation is 30 minutes, maybe less than that. So it does make it a very appropriate medicine for doing like a shorter term session on psychedelics. But things like mushrooms, things like other substances, those aren't legal for the licensed therapist. So the client would have to decide for themselves, am I going to go and have that experience somewhere else with someone who might be a sitter, someone who's a medicine person? And that's within their right? Because they can do whatever they want, but they can come back to the therapist later after they've had that experience and do something that we call integration, which is basically you'll sit with the therapist and you'll say, hey, you know, last weekend I participated in the ceremony. These are the things that came up for me. Can you help me like work through some of the thoughts that came towards me, some of the visuals that came, you know, whatever you want to share about that experience, the therapist is going to sit there and be able to help you integrate those experiences as a part of your own treatment plan. So there's a way to do it that way so that the therapist is not being impacted by legal issues, but also the client isn't either. And they're able to sit with a therapist who understands their experiences and won't pathologize that as drug use, but more of like them seeking a healing experience.
I
Yeah.
feel like when people think of psychedelics, they think just spiritual, right? Like it's going to be this big spiritual experience. But what people have to realize is there is science behind all of this, even the spiritual experience. There is science to show that parts of the brain that have been shut off are now on. Parts of the brain that were on are now off, right? Like the brain, the nervous system literally reorganizes itself and
Yes.
creates and allows for learning, neuroplasticity. There's a window of neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to change. And if there is a pathway for pain, that can literally be turned off during a psychedelic experience, where now you have this window of neuroplasticity for more learning where you can, okay, the brain has turned off this pattern. Now we can create a new one. And that's where the therapy, the integration comes in. That's where we can do art, right? Art inspired therapy. That's where we can do dream work. That's where we can look at the whole body, the whole person, all the experiences, and recreate a new experience for now and moving forward, while also looking back and remembering the past. And it doesn't have the same triggers, it doesn't have the same emotional buildup behind it. It's just a memory. It just becomes a regular old memory. Whereas trauma, the body doesn't know the difference between that present moment and that traumatic moment way back when. As far as it's concerned, it's happening right now. And what psychedelic therapy does is create a little space between that experience and the current moment to just make it now just, oh, that was a memory and I can remember it and not have the same emotional cascade of feelings and experiences and, you know, visuals or whatever that comes with it. And now I can move on with my life. And that's the beauty of psychedelics. And you brought up a point too, that it ain't for everybody, right? There are different kinds of psychedelics, medicines, and all of them, they're not for everybody. So it's just about finding the right one for you. Maybe ketamine is for you, or maybe mushrooms is for you, or maybe DMT or MDMA. Like that's coming next to, like, maybe it's cannabis, or maybe it's not. Like you have to find what works for you. And maybe it's none of them. Maybe it's art.
It might be.
Maybe dream work, maybe it's breath work. Like there's options, right? So it's not, we're not saying everybody go find the psychedelic for you. Maybe there is no psychedelic for you. Maybe it's dream work.
Yeah. And a lot of it, we have to look at what's the main thing that's being done, which I think you explained perfectly, which is we are looking at that for that neuroplasticity. We want to reprocess some of these experiences. And for some people, that can just simply happen with an EMDR session, you know what I mean? And so, but for other people, you know, they take well to the psychedelic medicine. And so it is all meant to open you up. And really, to most people who have these experiences, they do say the one thing: I realize we're one. I realize that I have the capacity. Because what I do like about psychedelic medicine is that it gives people, maybe for that one moment, the realization, I have the capacity to experience peace, happiness, because that's something I experienced for that 30 minutes or 2 hours or whatever, you know. And that lets them know healing is possible inside of me.
Absolutely.
Whether or not I continue to do the medicine, whether or not I continue this modality, I have that capacity inside of me. Mm-hmm.
And even that alone creates hope. And all you need is hope sometimes for the ball to get rolling. And then before you know it. And if anyone's thinking like, oh, okay, everything I see is psychedelics and anxiety, psychedelics and depression, there is a lot of research. There has been a lot of research and a lot more coming out now. Research on pain and psychedelics. There is a website, psychedelicsandpain.org, which lists all of them. It's a newer association. I am a member of this association as a physical therapist working with individuals with chronic pain, where we do that. And this association is looking to include pain under the guidelines, because when ketamine is available widely, MDMA is going to be next, and there's all these different things coming down the pipeline, and they want to make sure that it's not just for anxiety, not just for depression, but people who experience chronic pain can also be included in these studies and in the criteria as well, so that they can get treatment. I mean, I heard a crazy story just this weekend. I was like, what the heck? It was an individual who was a paraplegic, and I believe it was mushrooms, and he had access to muscles that weren't supposed to be working, and he's no longer a paraplegic. I mean,
wow, I
is
would
that
love to read
the
that
brain?
story. Yeah,
Right?
I
Like,
think that's amazing because, right, the brain is having this opportunity to reprogram and reprocess. And that's amazing to me. And I feel like there's a lot of potential here with psychedelics, even doing couples work,
yeah,
even
so
helping
much.
people to connect again. There's the possibilities are endless. And I think that, at one place, we don't want to say, oh, there's this boom, it's going to help everybody. But at the next place, it can have incredible outcomes, incredible people who've experienced debilitating depression, debilitating, like you're saying, pain, finding relief.
It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And maybe we can add the website you're talking about, Keneal, and the article in the show notes, because there is some major breakthroughs coming through with psychedelics.
Right.
And also, having said that, it's not for everyone.
Right. And there's a preparation too. Maybe there is someone who thinks this might be an avenue for them, but they don't have much experience with non-ordinary states. This is what I call it.
Yep.
So even working with me, I would say I can introduce you to methods of feeling unafraid of non-ordinary states within yourself. Dreaming is a non-ordinary state. If people drink, you're in a non-ordinary state. But how do you begin to have a language for some of the things that you might experience on psychedelics? And so you may want to, I recommend to people, start getting into symbolism. If Carl Jung appeals to you, read some Carl Jung, and really, or watch things or participate in art or music or sound baths or yoga, anything that meditation can bring you into a non-ordinary state. And it's really that comfort zone of being okay with things that aren't literal and logical, but are utilizing that part of the brain that wants to give you imagery, that wants to communicate with symbolism. And that's a way where you can say, okay, maybe I'm ready now to experience psychedelics because I have a little familiarity with non-ordinary states now. And to me, that's a preparatory way, because if not, if you've lived a life pretty much where you're like, what I see is what I get, then psychedelics can be kind of like the kind of blow
It
your
can be
mind
very,
open.
very
Yeah.
destabilizing for some people,
Yeah, it
right?
can be a
Yeah,
little destabilizing because you're like, wow, I'm seeing little elves to the side and they're dancing around this tree. That doesn't seem right to me. You know what I mean? Or whatever, you know? I think this is why the arts are important. This is why different kinds of expression is important. And so there's even ways to prepare for these experiences so that you feel more open to what your mind might be showing you.
yeah. And I love the connection between all the things. I mean, they're all connected that you do. They're all connected. Even the ancestral work you talked about, like your vision quest and hearing, that is opening yourself up to non-ordinary states. So it's all connected, even though it may seem disconnected. It's all to show us that we are connected and all the things are connected. And at the end of the day, you know, you mentioned that our African ancestors want to see us succeed. Who doesn't, right? Like, which great grandmother of yours was like, I want you to do horrible. I wish you the worst. Like, no one, that's not a thing. So all of our ancestors, the ones in our recent past and the ones in our distant past paths, they all want us to do well. And when we think of ourselves as ancestors, because we are, right? Don't we want our future people to like think back and be like, Laura and Camara and Keneal wanted the best for us?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, and I mean, that's what makes the ancestral work so potent for everyone, is that you know that the people who came before you, they made it possible for you to be here now. They might have done small things. They haven't asked that one woman at the fruit stand for a date. She became your grandmother, you know, or to understand our parents. What I like about family constellations in many ways that I'm learning is that we can just be grateful to be here. Our to being here is the strength of our ancestors. Just to exist means our family had some kind of way of being a portal for us to be here. Now, sometimes we are fated into a family situation. We can't control that. We're born into a family system that may experience some economic problems. We may have been born into a family system that had a lot of trauma. But there's also something called our destiny, which is what you do with that fate. And a large part of the work that I do is to help people look at that fated system. It was just a fated system. We can personalize it if we need to, but that system was created by your parents, their parents. And you'll have to decide with your destiny, do you want to keep part of that fate going, or do you want to change some of it by healing and restructuring things so that you can live life a little bit more healthy? A lot of us have an unconscious allegiance to our family's pain. And some of that means that we have to be able to kind of look at those experiences and that fate and be like, you know, I'm going to do things different. I want to break a cycle here and create a destiny, not only for myself, but for the future ancestors. I love how you brought that in, because we're working on both ends of the spectrum here.
You are absolutely amazing. What you offer, your knowledge, what you bring to the table. So if you can, please tell our listeners where they can find you.
I'm currently living in New Mexico, but I am licensed in California and New Mexico. I just moved to New Mexico, so I'm opening up a practice here. And a lot of my work is virtual. So most people can work with me. If you want to work in a clinical way, you have to be a resident of California or New Mexico. But if you want to be a part of any kind of coaching groups that I have, I call them coaching groups just so that you'll know it's a general group that anyone can participate in from anywhere around the world. Go to my website. It's the ancestral psychotherapist .com. I have my phone number there, my email there. I have descriptions of groups that are coming up, and I'm going to be doing a few groups in the late summer, maybe a dream group. I like working with women on different topics of healing that include arts-based work. So, yeah, reach out to me because things are constantly growing that I'm participating in, and I would love to work with folks. And even if someone's a therapist and they want to know more about the kind of work I'm doing and maybe want to strengthen, you could be a therapist or you could have this professionally calls to you. If you want to do some consultations, I'm open to that as well. I do that for people too. I even help students who are looking at how they want to shape this work, and I'm pretty accessible usually. And I would love to hear from people because I feel like it's important to grow this community of people who want to look at wellness from a wholeness perspective, and who might want to include the ancestors, who might want to talk a little bit more about how they're using plant medicines even in their own treatment.
If anything, I just want this community to grow of people who are offering the kind of work that you do, because I think this is the direction that therapy needs to go. And quite honestly, with all the trauma that we've all experienced collectively in the last several years, this is just the direction that we need to go in. So thank you.
I totally believe that. Yeah, thank you for supporting that. And I'm so happy that you all invited me because it's important work, and therapy has to change with the times, and it's a good fertile time for that.
Thank you again.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate you both. And yeah, I look forward to future conversations. Yeah.
If you'd like to leave us a message or ask a question, please check the show notes with the link so you can reach us directly, or email us at beyondthepelvis@gmail.com.